And so I don't think that as a coach you can go away from this talk and implement much of this, but potentially I'll give you a few short tips that you can do. So in terms of the practical advice, I just want to say things about how to choose a dietitian, how to deliver the message to players, and potentially what are the basics that you can implement. So before I do that, we have some confession time. What coaches in this room have put in some of these nutrition strategies? These are all that I've come across firsthand with teams that I've played for. So the cabbage soup diet, anyone put that in place? No hands up. I don't think anyone's going to confess to these, but then you have the all-white diet, you have the no-white diet, so two different approaches there. The neutrino diet I've heard about, but I actually can't find any information on, so if anyone wants to tell me what that is, please come to me afterwards. Of course, everyone's heard about, we'll take raw eggs in the morning, so a bit of Rocky style. I presume some people have done the run and wearing a bin bag, again. This is a classic one. I hope that I've convinced you not to do that to your players. There's some fairly famous examples of no water being allowed at training. And then I have a couple of others. I knew a guy who had a friend who was a bodybuilder and he wanted them on these supplements, but there's something that there's no evidence for. And then I knew another coach who he was speaking to a greyhound trainer, and the greyhound trainer told him that he made sure that all his greyhounds were on B12. So all of a sudden all the players were on B12. And the one I forgot to put up here, which I thought about coming up in the car last night, was the tonic. Down the country, there's always people talking about the tonic. Do you have a tonic for me? Is there a tonic you can give me? Which I've never figured out what that actually means, but anyway, it's something that a lot of players want to try. Okay, so no one's going to confess to them, but these are strategies that coaches have implemented, and I would just recommend that you don't, as coaches, don't try and implement nutrition strategies unless you've got some good reason to do so, some backed up information. So just in terms of choosing or getting the best out of a nutritionist or dietitian, so if you, as a club, if you decide that you're going to invest in the services of a nutritionist or dietitian, I just make some points about that. So there's a lot of people out there who have qualifications in nutrition and dietetic related courses. They'll call themselves performance nutritionists. Just be careful about how you choose them and certainly how much money you pay them. Even in professional sport, a nutritionist is not present for 100% of athletes' meals. So when the nutrition, they obviously have control when they're there, but for the rest of the time, the choices have to be made by the player, and therefore you have to really educate the player, or else you have to give them something that they can go on, something like a meal plan. So the two main tasks that a nutritionist will be to provide meals under their control or under your control as a coach, or else to educate the player so that they can make their decisions independently. The thing is that most players will want something that's specific to their individual preferences. So players don't really want to just be handed a sheet with a list of different things that they don't really, ingredients they don't like, food intolerances they have. They want something a bit more specific. And generally what I see is that players will respond or comply better if they're given specific information. And so your nutritionist or whoever you're working with should be able to provide that. They should be able to give that level of service. So if a nutritionist does come on board, you need to be aware of the length of the type of talks or the information that they're given, because what players tend to do is, certainly players that have been around a few years now, they have this lack of interest. Basically, we've heard all of this before. I do it all already, that kind of stuff. So there's an apathy towards nutrition in certain cases. There shouldn't be too much information. The nutritionists should really focus on take-home messages that they give to the players. Practical examples to which players can relate. So this is something that works in a lot of situations, also in nutrition, that if you give examples of other successful athletes, can be from different sports or another team's approach, players will generally try and will buy into that if they're from a less successful team. Practical information rather than being overly scientific, and I'll give an example of this in a couple of slides. So the scientific information will tell us about the grams per kg body mass that an athlete should take. Basically means nothing to a player to give information in that form. So I'll come back to that. There can be communication issues I see a lot of the time. So nutritionists coming from scientific backgrounds will talk about kilograms and litres, whereas most people will be familiar with pounds and pints. Or if in the context of hydration, I would always try to measure things in mouthfuls. It's much more practical for a player to understand. Follow-up is important. Generally speaking, one-off talks are relatively useless. So if I was approached to work with a team, I certainly wouldn't just take their money and give them a one-off talk. I don't think it actually provides any value to them to just do a one-off talk. Too much information for players to take on board in one session. And in all cases, when a nutritionist speaks to your team, the players should leave the talk with something tangible. So there should be either a task that they need to do, a self-assessment, a meal plan that they can work off. And what I would classify that is as actionable information, so something that they can follow up with some kind of action. So as a coach or a manager, if you are paying for nutrition services, what I would recommend is that you demand some form of actionable information to be given to your players. A talk isn't going to do much, I can tell you that from experience. So look for information that they can work off. So the strategies for education can be done in different ways. You can do these team talks, but actually individual counselling probably works better, but obviously it's a bigger time investment. However, the things that you can use are things like fact sheets, get them to prepare booklets, bring them on supermarket tours, or give coaching lessons. Or there's the potential also to use social media to continually hit people with information about what they should be eating and why. If the nutritionist can be present when players are eating meals as well, that's also a very effective way in delivering information. So as the person is eating their food, as long as they're not talking with their mouth full, they can at least ask, is this the right food I should be taking? Should I try something else? For example, if you're at a buffet, nutritionists can be very useful in terms of educating players from a practical point of view. So just to give an example of some things that I've seen presented to players that are really fairly useless in terms of information. So if players are showed this kind of information, they come into your team and they tell you, well, you're training 3 to 5 hours a week, so you need 240 to 400 grams of carbohydrate. That means nothing to players. They have no idea what that means. If you ask them what's 40 grams of carbohydrate, very few of them will be able to tell you what it is. Never mind tell you how they're going to get 400 in a day. So that effectively means nothing to players. This is very useful for me as a lecturer to give to my students, but not to give to players. This is also fairly useless to players as well, because everyone knows about the food plate or the food pyramid. So turning up at a nutrition talk and showing players this really won't tell them much. They need much more tangible information than that. And showing slides like this, where you're saying things like, you need X percentage from carbohydrate, from fat, from protein. You break it down, as I said, in this grams per kg body mass. Again, that means nothing to players. So if the nutritionist is doing that, you really want to ask them to provide something that's a bit more tangible, a bit more like, as I said, actionable information. So some examples of that, and we'll finish up then. One would be, for example, players say, well, can I make my own sports drink? Do I have to drink sports drinks all the time? Well, you can give them the options of how to make it themselves. That's something that's actionable. They can go away and they're thinking about nutrition as they go away. They're thinking, well, I need a sports drink. I'm going to make my own. I'm going to bring it to training every day. So actionable information. The P chart, as I said before, so monitoring their hydration. It makes them more aware of the fact that hydration is important for performance. Something called a food exchange list, which is if you want to go down that route of saying that your target is 400 grams of carbohydrate in a day, then you give them a list of information. These are 50-gram portions of carbohydrate. You give them a whole list of them and you tell them you need to take X amount of these in a given day. Or you tell them your gym session is coming up. You need to eat one of these beforehand, one of these afterwards, and you need to combine it with one of these protein sources. And so the player then has the information in the sense that now they have little units that they can put together to form their own diet, form their own meal plans. To go a step further then, you would actually give them the actual snack. So this is just a snack ideas. So this is just a list of things where they can combine different foods together in order to meet certain goals. Again, this is more attuned to something like what you would eat before and after a gym session. So a grilled chicken breast and a cup of cooked rice. Various examples like that. To go even one step further then would be to come up with a daily meal plan. So you tell a player exactly what to eat, at what time, and if you want to go even further, you give them the recipes and teach them how to prepare it. But this would be an example of a daily meal plan. You might put together something like that for the 48 hours leading up to a game, or if it's a player who's trying to gain muscle mass, for example, you might be very specific about what they eat on the days that they train. And then there are other resources that you can use, and so one of the best resources that I've seen out there, these are from the Australian Institute of Sport. These are 3 sort of athlete cookbooks, and actually as it happens now you can access all of the recipes at the Australian Institute of Sport's website now. So the content of these recipe books is now free actually on their website. So just the last slide then is just to say what basics can you do as a coach. So what I would recommend is first of all that you make your players aware of hydration. So as a coach or manager, you bring the water to training or you insist that the players bring water. Now maybe everyone's doing that already. You can ask them about their urine colour. You can do spot checks where you bring your tubes and get them to give you a sample. The other thing that you can do is to consider weighing in before and after training. So if you weigh someone in just their underwear before training, you may weigh them immediately afterwards. If there's a difference in weight, then they've become dehydrated, and there's certain amounts of fluid that you can recommend that they need to consume in order to become rehydrated. So that's another step down the line. You can make your own sports drinks for matches. So those recipes that I showed up, as a coach, you could make your own sports drinks as well. And just to bear in mind that if you have a squad of about 20 to 25 players, they should really be drinking about 15 litres. That's even under a litre for each player. The reason I say under a litre is because most of them won't drink that amount anyway. But you should at least try and, over the course of 2 hours, most players should be really drinking about a litre, maybe more. And even at that, they're still going to become dehydrated. Obviously, with inter-county scenarios, people will generally meet in restaurants or have caterers for pre-match meals. At club level, if you want to make sure that everyone's eating something, then you would have players meet in groups. And basically what you're doing is you're making sure everyone is eating something in preparation for a game. The other thing then to focus on recovery is that you insist that players bring a small food item for recovery. So they have to bring something to training. You make that a requisite. And in order to bring something in a bag, they're obviously not going to bring a meal, although if some of them are so inclined and they have the Tupperware, then they may well bring a meal. But otherwise, you're talking about very simple snacks, fruit, trail mix, so fruit and nut mixes, flavoured milk perhaps, cereal bars, the kind of stuff that can be transported in a bag but gives a very small amount of nutrients, good nutrients, provided immediately after a training or a game. So there are some very simple strategies. So just the final words are just to say that nutrition is absolutely critical in terms of performance and development. Recognising the specific demands of each GAA sport, each situation, each athlete, that's key to developing the right and successful nutrition strategies. As I said, as coaches, you can probably focus on the acute stuff and leave the more long-term interventions to qualified nutritionists. The main nutritional focus for Gaelic Games is really to delay fatigue by focusing on hydration and the body's carbohydrate stores. It's probably not consuming the right foods probably isn't enough. You need to think about timing, especially if you're working with players who are either looking to drop body fat or increase muscle mass. And one of the major problems we have at the moment is not that we don't know the science behind nutrition, but delivering the message to players and seeing a successful implementation of strategies is really what the major challenge is at the moment. So practical communication and the dissemination of information is really the key challenge that we need to work on. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to stay around and talk afterwards. So